Hi, everyone. I wish I could see you all in person. I'm just staring at a little camera right now, imagining all your beautiful faces. Thank you, CMPS, for inviting me out again to share some of the work we do out here in the Presidio, San Francisco. I was here, I can't even remember when that was, within the last year, and I gave a very broad brush picture of what has been happening past, present, and what will be happening in the future in the Presidio, which is a part of the larger Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So we are a federal, basically a national park site within the larger national park. And so last time I was here, I spoke very broadly about what we've been doing in the Presidio in terms of restoration and through the perspective of wildlife. And I intentionally, if I remember correctly, I intentionally left coyotes out of that presentation because that would have been maybe 1 to 2 slides dedicated to an incredibly complex topic that would have not done it justice and would have left people probably more confused than informed and educated. So CMPS was gracious enough to invite me back to really specifically talk about Presidio coyotes and a little bit more broadly San Francisco coyotes, and even more broadly urban coyotes. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, as the title suggests. And so thanks for joining. I anticipate a lot of questions at the end of this, and I have some questions for all you native plant people, and I'll get to those. Before I really get into the meat of this, here's the agenda here. The most important thing is, of course, always context. This is a complex topic. There's a lot of things floating around the internet and around our towns and cities that we've been hearing over the last couple of years, maybe the last couple of decades. Some of those are true, some of those are partially true, some of those are straight up misinformation. But the context about what I'm going to be talking about is really, really important. And I know a lot of you are obviously naturalists, so a lot of this is probably going to be things you already know, but maybe things you don't know. And of course, everybody hears other people talking about coyotes. So what I'm hoping that you all get out of this is some really good, important information that you might not know that is really important when you talk to the public about urban coyotes, because there's a lot of FAQs that I hear all the time, that are really common, but people really need to understand them. And I'm going to get into those. And then I'm going to go into these other things, managing humans and coyotes in the Presidio, and the bigger project and monitoring that we've been doing over the last couple of years in the Presidio. So just some historical context of coyotes in San Francisco. We know that coyotes were here long before the Europeans arrived during the gold rush time. We know coyotes have been a part of the indigenous people's culture throughout California. A lot of their origin stories and a number of stories involve the coyote. Here's a question for you native plant folks out there. Of course, we all are familiar with one of our most common shrubs, coyote brush, Baccharis pilularis. Coyote brush, I was under the impression it's called that because of its furry seeds. They kind of look like coyote fur that you see there in the background. What I don't really know, and maybe somebody out there in the audience could add this to the chat, is that common name. Does anybody know the history of that common name? How old is that common name? Is that an indigenous common name that was passed on, or is that something it's just a curiosity that I've been thinking about? How old is that common name? But in San Francisco specifically, some of our first documentations, at least on paper, were from just around the gold rush days. And you see here a newspaper clipping from 1860, the Daily Alta, California. You can't really read the language or the writing there, so I'll just quickly read it. Strange visitor, a coyote not having the fear of rifles and dogs before his eyes, came into town a few nights since and succeeded in capturing a hen from a roost in the vicinity of Mason and Green Streets. The rascal got safely away with his prize. Time was, and not long ago either, when such vermins lopped fearlessly among the chaparral where now stands blocks of buildings. I want you to keep that in mind, because that is what we call foreshadowing. And then you see down there, that's a record from 1925 out of the California Academy of Sciences. That is one of the last, at least documented with a physical specimen of coyotes in San Francisco, and it was taken from Golden Gate Park. I believe it was lethally removed, but I don't know those details. It's a safe assumption in those days that it was lethally removed. Cue the picture. So, of course, in the early days of California and San Francisco in the 19th and 20th century, people did not tolerate predators, including coyotes. And we know that for a number of reasons. Historic photos. We also know that there were government-sponsored bounties for predators like coyotes and mountain lions, recreation and profit for their pelts, and of course depredation. So coyotes preying on livestock, essentially. A lot of conflicts and a lot of profit motivation in that. But of course, things have changed throughout the later half of the 20th century into the 21st century. Our society has changed, and that has allowed coyotes to come back. So really what our society has changed in some significant, kind of obvious ways that you can think of relative to the coyote, but you see an increase in animal rights advocacy, and you see a decrease generally in hunting. You see city ordinances start to come online. So it's not okay to use a firearm in a city. It's not okay to trap. It's not okay to poison. It's not okay to do these things anymore. There's laws against that kind of thing. In 1974, the state of California outlawed mammalian-sponsored bounties, again, a reflection of societal change. And on top of that, the coyote itself is an incredibly adaptable and intelligent creature. It is what we would call a generalist. So it doesn't really require anything too specific other than food, shelter, and water. And cities, of course, have all of that stuff. So this societal shift in the later half of the 20th century, on top of the coyotes' biology and intelligence and all of that, really resulted in coyotes being allowed to move back into these urban areas. And in San Francisco, they came back by 2003. So around late 1920s, a general absence until 2003. So when the first confirmed coyote was back in the Presidio. And since then, they have become well established. But not only are they well established in San Francisco, we of course know now that these animals are in essentially every major city in North America, including Canada. And they really are adaptable creatures, and they are really thriving in these urban areas in spite of a century plus of persecution by humans. But of course, all of these cities, including San Francisco and the Presidio, are really trying to grapple and understand, how do we, as wildlife managers or natural resource managers, or public safety managers, et cetera, how do we manage these animals in the midst of our urban setting? This is a new phenomenon. Nobody really has any clear-cut, easy answers. There's a lot of unknowns. The historic approach, as I already mentioned, was just straight up lethal removal, no tolerance, shoot on sight. It's not the same anymore. And so many of these cities have or are starting to adopt the coexistence stance, and understanding that these animals are here to stay. So how do we then manage ourselves and the environment, including these animals, to promote coexistence and reduce conflict between humans and coyotes? And that's really kind of what I'm going to be talking about, what we've been doing here in the Presidio, really trying to drill down into that. How do you do this? What are the best practices for doing that to promote coexistence? So of course, again, preaching to the choir here, a lot of us understand the value from an ecological, environmental view of predators in the environment, and how important they are in terms of checks and balances to promote a healthier, more biologically diverse ecosystem. So a lot of you veg heads out there, especially those of you who volunteer and are in the conservation management realm, when we think about management and conservation through vegetation, the foundation of the ecosystem, what we're really trying to do there is managing and conserving bottom up, from the foundation of the ecosystem up, cascading through the different trophic levels of wildlife. What coyotes and predators do is they help us from the top down. So their predation, they're the top predators preying on these small rodents that would otherwise impact, and those impacts cascade down. So again, think checks and balances. Coyotes' predation on these small rodents and things like that are really beneficial to the environment. And we know one of these terms is called the Miso carnivore release. So when coyotes are no longer in the environment, you see things like raccoons and rats and other small mammals like that start to explode because they don't have the checks and balances that they would naturally with predators like coyotes. And when you see an increase in those kinds of small mammals, you see a decrease in things like native birds and native reptiles. You see an impact on a lot of vegetation because a lot of those rodents are going to be consuming those vegetations, and that's going to cascade through the ecosystem. So predators like coyotes are really important for the checks and balances to promote healthier, more biologically diverse ecosystems. But of course, this is what we're here to talk about mainly. This is my life. The coyotes, of course, are not without their controversy. And human-coyote conflict, again, has been around for as long as humans and coyotes have been on this planet, really. But it is amplified in the urban environment. And a lot of conflict can be broken into two things. You have real conflict and you have perceived conflict. And whether or not it's real or perceived, a human experiencing the conflict is still feeling real emotions. And it is my job to address that and to try to find ways to mitigate and reduce conflict between coyotes and people. And there are really two main drivers of human coyote conflict. Number one is feeding. See the trash over there on the left-hand side. So either indirect feeding like that, or leaving your pet food outside, things like that, or direct feeding, like, hey, come here, little coyote, I want to get that perfect selfie with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. That's one driver of conflict, probably the most significant driver of conflict. And then the other one, of course, is domestic animals. So coyotes have a reputation. They are infamous in urban environments. And a lot of that's perceived. Of course, it does happen, as you see here. Top right is from San Francisco. And the bottom is, remember I said foreshadowing? So that did not go away. There are still chickens in San Francisco. And yes, the chickens have been raided in the past. The owners learned their lesson and figured out how to secure their coop. But I got a phone call one morning and there was a picture in my email inbox with a coyote running down, I think it was Lombard Street, with a big white chicken in its mouth. So still happens. And of course, so there is real conflict, but there's even more perceived conflict. And a lot of that is really driven by misinformation, urban myths. Social media really is an echo chamber, of course, no surprise. And there's a lot of alarmist language that can be put on there and really trigger a lot of amplification of some serious arguments and very tense debates. And this is not just San Francisco. This is all cities where coyotes are present. So that generates, of course, a lot of phone calls to me. I respond to a lot of conflict, and we need to understand how best to respond to these conflicts so we can get through the emotion and understand what actually happened in each situation, so we can then address each situation based on the facts of what actually happened. Was it human driven? Was it coyote driven? Or was something else going on that we need to figure out why, so we can address and try to reduce in the future? But of course, I get a lot of really, really common, frequently asked questions. Everybody asks these questions, and I'm sure everybody here has heard them or is even thinking them right now. Number one, okay, I don't want you to kill these coyotes, but they don't belong in this city. Why don't you just catch them and relocate them, take them to Yosemite, take them far away, they don't belong here. Okay, fair enough, I get it. I get why you would think that. It's illegal in the state of California to relocate a coyote. Straight up, full stop. You cannot do it. It is illegal. The state of California will never allow that. So there you go. It's not possible. Secondly, even if it was legal, it doesn't work. These are territorial animals. We'll get into that in a little bit. They're territorial animals. When you remove an animal from its territory, you put it in another animal's territory, you're causing problems with these territorial animals. And studies have shown that when you relocate a territorial animal, the first thing it wants to do, go right back to where it came from. And typically what happens, they get hit by cars doing that. So it's not an option. That's a number one most frequently asked question. The number two, or sometimes tied with number one, is why don't you just kill them all? Get rid of them. They don't belong here. They're going to kill every last one of us humans. They don't belong here. They're taking over. This is a complicated thing for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is kind of buried in the misinformation is a lot of people don't understand that coyotes are territorial and they do breed, and we'll talk more about that, but they actually will maintain their own territory, a resident pair, breeding pair, and they will actually keep other coyotes out. And there's an endless supply of coyotes in the greater Bay Area. So when a pair establishes territory like the Presidio and another transient comes through, they will aggressively chase that animal out. So they have a natural cap there. When you remove that resident pair, you create a vacuum, and those endless supply of coyotes or transients are looking to fill the void. So you're going to have that void be filled within less than a year, and it's an endless supply. So lethal removal is, there's the ethics behind it all, there's the feasibility behind it all, but one of the biggest things is it's not a one and done type of thing. It's just going to keep happening and keep happening and keep happening. So your best bet is to work with the resident pair that you have and monitor them, understand them, and allow them to maintain their territory and keep others out. And we'll talk more about what happens when their pups grow up, but they really do. Their social behaviors are really important in understanding how they put a natural cap at a certain number of coyotes within a given area like San Francisco. We're going to get more into that. So some of the things that we do in the Presidio to manage these conflicts, drivers of conflict, a lot of conflict is driven by our behaviors, human behaviors. So that's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit, although it's not as easy as it might sound, but it's the most obvious thing to address. No feeding. It's illegal to feed for the reasons I talked about, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. Keeping your pet food indoors, cleaning up after your barbecue. Don't leave your trash. We manage our trash cans so raccoons don't knock it over. They do. But when we put bungee on it, they're less likely to knock it over, spilling it open, and creating all these other things coming in. Whether it's coyotes eating the trash or coyotes eating the rats that are eating the trash, managing the trash is important. Cats are not allowed outdoors in the Presidio. It's a national park, so we want to protect our biodiversity. So therefore, cats are not allowed outside. But you also want to protect your cat. And there's many dangers out there in the world in addition to coyotes. So keeping your cats inside is a responsible way to have a cat safely. And leashing dogs is essential. There are off-leash designated areas, and we ask people, please keep your dog on leash in leashed areas. And we're going to talk a lot more about dogs because that is number one cause of conflict between these animals, dogs and coyotes. We'll get more into that. So some of our policies here have proven to be really useful in reducing conflict. As I said, a lot of misinformation and a lot of ignorance around coyotes, especially in urban areas. Can't blame people. Coyotes now have been here for almost 20 years, but still, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people still don't know what a coyote is. And if they do hear coyote, their background, internal bias is based on maybe urban myths that they've been hearing through the grapevine, et cetera. So awareness, education is huge. Presentations, visiting school groups. We have a variety of content, door hangers, brochures, things like that. We really want to get the facts out to people. And what people don't know, they tend to fear. When people start to understand a little bit better about these animals in the midst of their urban setting, we can reduce that fear, and therefore we can reduce the perceived conflict. Because most of the conflict I hear about is perceived. One of the things that we do promote, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is the concept of hazing. Now, hazing is not as straightforward as a lot of people might think. It's kind of a controversial topic. It's not as efficient as some people would hope it to be, but it is a tool that can be used on occasion. It's usually not even necessary, but it can be used to get a coyote out of a certain area. Say a coyote's on your front lawn and for whatever reason you don't want it there, coyotes, there's a caveat to what I'm about to say, but I'm going to clarify that after this. Coyotes are very responsive generally to humans hazing them out of a certain area. Not always, and there's a caveat I'm going to get into, but generally, acting loud and aggressive towards the coyote, coyotes have a natural fear of humans. What happens in the urban environment is people ignore them and people aren't hunting them to kill them. So they don't see us as a threat. They see us as the wallpaper. They just ignore us and they kind of act indifferent to us. But when people act threatening, lunge at them, even throw things at them, not to hurt them, but to scare them, they generally will respond to that, spraying them with a hose. But there's a lot of things to consider in this idea of hazing. And again, it's a tool that can be used, but it's really oftentimes not necessary at all. Most of the time, just appreciate the coyote and be on your way. And don't get close to it. Don't try to feed it. Just be on your way. But one thing, if you ever want to do this, you want to be mindful of your location. You don't want to chase a coyote into traffic for the safety of the coyote and for the safety of everybody around you. You want to be very mindful of that. Again, this is a tool. You don't need to use it all the time. But we do promote it under certain situations, but it's very contextual. And sometimes you do not want to do hazing, and I'm going to get into that right now. So pupping season is the #1 most important season for dog owners, and it is the busiest time of the year for my team here in the Presidio, because it is the time where we see the most conflict that we have all year round is dogs and coyotes, specifically dogs coming too close to an active den site where there are pups. Coyotes see all canines that are not part of their family unit as a direct threat to their pups. And if a canine that's not part of their family gets too close to their den, they will aggressively chase that dog or other coyote away from the den site. At a sufficient enough distance away, that coyote will turn around and go back to the den site. The Presidio is a very small place, 1,500 acres, and there's only so many places where these coyotes can den. And also, there are active dog walking trails basically everywhere in the Presidio. So there's always this conflict happening. And there's a lot of crossover where active coyotes are and dogs are. So what we do in the Presidio is we use these motion activated camera traps and other technology that I'll get into to find where the den is. So first off, there's only one resident pair in the Presidio. So there's only ever one active den every year in the Presidio. So we want to find where that den is before the pups are born and monitor that. Monitoring us helps us find where it's going to be, monitoring the litter size, things like that. And so this is just a action shot of the alpha female from this year digging out a den. And our camera does not disturb her. It's a no glow infrared. She doesn't know it's there. No noises, no flashes, none of that. And this allows us to monitor these den sites wirelessly. I'm going to show some gratuitous puppy footage here. This allows us to monitor litter size. This is only 2 at a time at once, but in this year's litter, 2015, the highest count in one of our shots was 8 pups. So it allows us to monitor, again, litter size. And watching the pups develop, and again, interactions, trying to assess what are they feeding them? Squirrels, rats, things like that. And it really generates a lot of content, of course, for outreach and things like that. And when we find the den, we will close trails to dogs, not to people, to dogs. And what we found is when we create this buffer around the den site with no dogs, conflict goes way down. Because again, when that dog gets too close to those pups, that's when you have the conflict. And so this is really what happens. Once at a certain age, the pups get a little older and they start to follow their mom and dad around to learn how to be coyotes. So they're not really tethered to the den site anymore. And that's where we start to see this expansion of conflict with dogs get a little further out than just the den site. This is an example of when hazing will not work. What happens here is if you are the dog owner, walker, you're walking your dog, hopefully your dog is on leash, it's very important, but you come across a coyote that's acting aggressive towards your dog. What season is it? Okay, it's spring, summertime. This is coyote pupping season. This coyote is acting aggressive. Are there pups around? I don't know. I don't see them. There are probably pups around. this coyote is acting aggressive to your dog for a reason. And what it's saying is, dog, get away from here now. I will nip at you. I'm going to chase you out of here. Get away now. And what's happening is a lot of people in their mind, they confuse, okay, this is when I need to haze. And what's happening is the parental protective instincts of the coyote is overriding their fear of your hazing. And all they're focused on is getting that dog out of the area, chasing it away. So this is when we see a lot of, unfortunately, people try to sit there with their dog and try to haze the coyote away. And they say, hey, it didn't work. I tried to haze it. It's like, this is not the time to haze. This is the time to have your dog leashed and to just leave the area. The coyote is telling the dog, get out of here now. Whether you see the pups or not, just get the dog out of the area. Don't run, but just get the dog out of the area, and the coyote will turn around and go back to where the pups are. Really important. That's where hazing gets a little confusing to people. And that's why we need to really educate people on this seasonal dynamic of dogs and coyotes. Okay, so switching gears here a little bit. When I started in this role in 2014, there was nobody before me really focused on monitoring and managing coyotes. So we didn't really have any information on these animals at all. And it was a little embarrassing when people would angrily ask me questions like, how many coyotes are in the park? I swear there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and you can't answer that question. You people don't know what you're talking about, yada, yada, yada. These animals are notoriously difficult to study because essentially they all look the same, and they're mostly active at night, generally. So it's really hard to study them and really hard to answer seemingly simple questions like, how many are there? What are their activity patterns? Where do the pups go when they grow up and get to that age where they want to leave? And who's who in the coyote world? So I started to develop this monitoring program based on some other cities around the country like Chicago and Denver and Los Angeles, and really try to apply 21st century technology to better understanding and generating higher resolution information that will help us plug back into our management program and our education program. So what we do is we tag these animals with uniquely colored ear tags so we know each individual who's who from a far distance. And we put temporary GPS collars that fall off over time. And we health screen, so we draw blood and we take genetic tissue samples. And I'm going to get into some of that stuff. But just a little bit of general idea of some of the data that we're getting. This should be no surprise to most people. Coyotes are mostly active at night. You can see the collars have an accelerometer on them. So when the coyote's running around and doing its coyote thing, the collar is tracking that information, and you get an estimate on activity levels. And so you see in the daytime, generally, they're usually lounging in the sun. Occasionally, you'll see them eating or hunting gophers in the middle of the day, lunchtime. But this is really important because a lot of people, when they see coyotes out in the middle of the day, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, this is abnormal. This coyote is rabid. It's diseased. It's abnormal. People need to understand that it's not abnormal, nor is it unusual to see a coyote out in the middle of the day. And this is, you can see it here. Generally, they're out sunning and basking and occasionally hunting, but most of the time they're tucked away. So this is a representation of coyote activity through time, and this is just a general snapshot of coyote activity across space. You can see at night is really when they cover their ground, patrolling their territory throughout the Presidio, going into other areas like Land's End, the Yacht Club, Fort Mason, occasionally making journeys down in Golden Gate Park, and even further. We'll show some examples of that later. But in the daytime, you can see they really have their little hangout spots. Most of those are within the forest, tucked away, minding their own business, away from the crowd, away from the people. They just want to be left alone. They snooze, maybe get up, drink some water, eat a gopher, go back to sleep. And then when nighttime kicks in, that's when they're really kicking into high gear. Another important thing that this type of monitoring allows us to do is really understand and monitor their behavior. And that's what we're really interested in with these animals, especially when we talk about them as individuals. We want to know who's who and how are they acting and how are they changing through time. Are some of them being exposed to things like feeding that's going to change their behavior for the worse? And when I say for the worse, I mean in terms of public safety. When you start to feed coyotes, that's when they start to associate people with food. That's when they start to approach people expecting food, and that's when they're more likely to bite people. So we were able to track them, watch them in real time when we can, assess their behavior. Okay, they're acting normal. This one keeps visiting a site, a dumpster, somebody's backyard. Are those people feeding them? If those people are feeding them, we need to go up and we need to enforce our our policy around that. If we start to see some behaviors that are of concern, there are a number of tools you can use, from putting up barriers to block some of their paths of least resistance. We found very effective little fences to just stop them from running between garages where there's a dog tied up regularly. And of course, we'd work with the dog owner. Hey, don't tie your dog up and leave it unattended. Attend your dog at all times. And at the same time, block this path of least resistance. That's one tool. Another tool is, as I mentioned, hazing. There's different levels of hazing. The extreme end of hazing would be paintballs, for example. We don't use that often. We have used it in the past. And you can see my Jackson Pollock Coyote hybrid right there. That's kind of what that's getting at. It's something that can be done. It's a little tricky to use for a number of reasons. We don't do it often, but it's an extreme example of hazing. And then, of course, if behavior becomes such a problem and there's red flags, and we monitor those red flags and those different thresholds, if something happens so that an animal becomes so abnormal that it crosses a threshold of public safety concern, for example, somebody keeps feeding these animals and one animal, an individual, is starting to approach people and we know it's that individual because the ear tag's being reported, we know who that animal is, we monitor that animal. If thresholds are crossed and that abnormal behavior, depending on the context, most of the times food conditioning and habituation cannot be reversed. And we know the trend, it will lead generally to bites. The most extreme case of behavior management or modification is lethal removal. Lethal removal is a tool that needs to be taken seriously. It has happened in the past and it's not taken lightly. And if and when it happens, we want to know 100% who the culprit is, and for sure that this is abnormal behavior that cannot be modified through other means. We want to exhaust all other means within a reasonable amount of time, because again, public safety is number one here. And some of these behaviors, if thresholds are crossed, again, food conditioning and habituation is the number one most obvious thing that happens in urban environments. So having individual identification, i.e. ear tags, is super helpful for that because we know who is who and we can monitor each individual. So just a little generalization about monitoring the population of the Presidio through time. Number one, maybe number two or three, biggest concern of a lot of people is these animals are breeding, they're going to take over the city. There's hundreds in the Presidio alone. Not true. As I mentioned, they're social territorial animals. Their social behavior dynamics really limit the number within a territory like the Presidio. And so this is generally what we're seeing through time. You see that the resident pair are the long-term residents. They stay for as long as they're alive, or if they're overthrown by another pair. In the springtime, generally every spring they have their pups. So you see a spike, on average, 6 pups per litter on average. And pups are born, so you see an increase. And then some pups die young for a number of reasons that we're still trying to understand. And towards the end, really around fall, September, or October-ish, pups generally start to disperse, meaning that either they strike out on their own because they're adventurous and independent, and or their parents start to not tolerate them around and will actively kick them out and aggressively chase them out. So they have to strike out on their own. At that point, they become what we call as transient animals. So that's dispersal. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And at this point in the year is when a lot of pups disperse and or die. We're going to talk about that as well. So as I said, dispersal is the time of the year of their life when they leave, whether it's on their own accord or their parents just kick them out through aggression. It's not always at 9 months of age. It really varies, but generally you start to see them start to leave their home birth territory around 9 months of that fall of their birth year. And this is one example. He was the second animal we caught, 2016. We affectionately named him O2M. He was the second animal and he was a male. And he was caught in 2016 and he left the Presidio in 2017. So he actually stuck around and helped rear the next year's litter as the older brother. And then he struck out on his own and he stuck to the urban areas, the suburban areas you can see right there, used major roads as corridors, occasionally used train tracks, but Camino Real was a big road you can see right down there in Redwood City. That's basically Camino Real. He didn't venture hardly at all into the wild open spaces of Santa Cruz Mountains. And he's an urban animal, born and raised. He knows how to navigate and how to find food. He went all the way down past San Jose into the open areas and turned right back around. He probably came into conflict with some territorial animals, maybe mountain lions, I don't know, but definitely other coyotes. Turned right back around, and you can see that cluster near Sunnyvale. That's around Los Gatos area. He actually ended up settling in right at the intersection of Highway 280 and 85, right there in the buffers around the highway intersection. And he didn't last too long. And so that's what happens when coyotes live near a highway. And I didn't actually ask this in the last one, but I was going to get into it, I guess. So spoiler, I was going to ask what people thought and put in the chat what you think the #1 cause of death in urban environments is. Kind of already spoiled it, but I'm curious to hear what people think, even though it is the answer right here. And it is cars. Cars are the #1 predators of coyotes in urban environments. This is just some general stats of San Francisco citywide roadkill. And these are the ones that were found. So you got to keep in mind, some coyotes are hit. They're not found sometimes. Sometimes they'll go die under a bush and nobody will ever find them. These are just the ones that were found. But you can see, obviously it happens. This should be no surprise to people. They really don't have any other predators. Again, people aren't hunting them. Mountain lions aren't killing them. It's cars, but not only cars. Cars are #1. We also see some deaths from things like occasionally parvovirus will kill younger animals. Rodenticide exposures have killed animals in San Francisco. As they consume rodents that have been contaminated with rodenticides, it accumulates in them, and eventually they can't succumb to that. So of course, cars are #1. And here's an interesting short term. It's only about 5 years, but this is the monthly average in San Francisco, January through December for 5 years. And what I really wanted to highlight here is the spike that you see in September, October. What did I say about dispersal? Dispersal generally starts to happen around the fall months, September, October. And this is really what we're seeing here. We're seeing the younger animals, the naive animals, leaving their homes, becoming more adventurous, more visible, more trying to navigate through these urban areas, mostly using the streets, because that's really the only way they can get through these dense urban areas. And they're naive young animals. They're like kids. They don't understand the dangers of traffic. And you see a spike happen almost consistently every year in the fall months as these younger animals start to become more adventurous and disperse. This is also the time of the year we start to see a huge increase in public reportings of visible sightings of coyotes. And every year, like clockwork, you see the same thing on social media. People saying, "Oh my God, I've never seen this many coyotes out. This is insane. They're going crazy. They're everywhere." And it's like, this happens every year. These are the young ones of the year that are leaving. And again, most of those animals, unfortunately, aren't actually going to survive because of cars. When a coyote gets past its first or second year, they have more likelihood to survive longer because they really start to get those street smarts and start to understand how to navigate traffic. We've actually seen older coyotes run up to a busy intersection in the middle of the day or night, but we've seen it. They'll sit down and literally they will look both ways and then they will cross. It's the difference between naive kids and adults. It's the same thing with these coyotes. So here's just a snapshot of the animals that we've been monitoring through time. The top were the alpha pair, that the alpha female. We captured her in 2016, and each level you see is a litter, and each one that has tags represents an animal that we've captured and tagged. And over the years, we've captured 16 animals over 4 litters, and one of those was not from the Presidio. So these are the animals that we know of that either died or their fates were unknown. Most of them got hit by cars. Most of those happened outside of the Presidio as these animals were dispersing. I'd say most of them happened in the city, but a lot of them happened down the peninsula. The ones in the pink are the success stories, and I want to highlight some of those success stories really quickly. And then the block in blue is the real drama I want to share with you all. So 09M, double red, we caught him in, he was born in 2017 and we caught him in later 2017. And he dispersed from the Presidio in August 2018. You can see his journey south. He ended up down near Crystal Springs Reservoir. And that's where he ended up hanging out, a nice little area right on the edge, right on the urban edge. And his collar ran out of batteries. So we wirelessly detached that collar, sent a code through the internet, satellite pinged it down, collar fell off. We were able to retrieve that collar to reuse it. They're very expensive. And then once those collars are off, they're off the radar. We don't know what happens to them. They still have the ear tags though. That's key thing to remember here. Those ear tags generally are permanent. They can fall out, but generally they're permanent. So we just kind of said, oh, well, he's gone. We'll never see him again. The beauty of the internet and long-term monitoring with ear tags. I received an email from Marilyn. Marilyn, if you're watching, hi, thank you for letting me use your beautiful camera trap footage. Marilyn runs a camera trap program down in that area. Check out our website. It's full of cool stuff. She actually wrote a brilliant article on 09's story, but she found me through the grapevine and said, hey, this animal's got ear tags. What's going on here? Look at those red ear tags. Who's that? Oh, I know that. Wait, who's that friend with him? Wait, look at that. What's going on with her stomach? Oh, that looks like she had some pups. 09M, living the dream, success story. So Marilyn's been catching him occasionally over the last couple of years on her traps. It's been a little while, I think maybe a year or so since he's been seen. So his fate remains to be seen, but a coyote that successfully reproduces even at least once is a successful coyote. They've achieved their life goal. And just one more great shot of 09 living the dream. This is him and his mate. They found a mountain lion cache and just going to town on this thing. Living the dream. Look at that, tasty, savory, delicious. Yeah, they're loving it. So good to know and to see some really long-term continued monitoring of these animals. 09's sister, this is 10F. She was the 10th animal we caught and she was a female. See those double yellow ear tags? We monitored her for a while. Her collar ran out of battery, so we dropped it wirelessly. And again, she went off the radar. She became that ghost dog. Who knows what happened to her? We didn't see or hear from her for a year, maybe more. And then through the power of community science, boom, she popped up in Candlestick Park. Living the dream, living the high life, Candlestick Park. Look at that. What a trophy. So thank you to iNaturalist for helping us expand our monitoring. Because again, once those radio collars, those GPS collars go offline, that's it. But now at least we still have the ear tags. And so this really, people posting those pictures, whether they know it or not, is hugely beneficial to our long-term monitoring. So if you're out there and you're an iNat user and you're sending coyote pictures, I'm seeing those if it's in San Francisco County, so keep it up. And kind of starting to wrap this up. I really wanted to save the best drama for last. Key the theme intro music here. But coyote real life drama is something that HBO wishes that they could even get close to, because some of these dramas that are happening, we don't even know about. And you can only imagine, and I'm going to give you just a little taste of it that we've been uncovering through our monitoring programs. But this is the alpha pair that I came to know when I started this program. I don't know their origin stories. I have their genetics, or I have her genetics. That's the alpha female right there in the middle, showing us her tongue. And that's her mate. We don't know how long they were together, but they were the king and queen of the Presidio for a long time, certainly more than 3 or 4 years. And then, as I'd mentioned, one of the animals that we caught was a transient animal. We caught double red here in early 2009. We caught her and we said, who's this animal? We don't recognize her. She looks different. What's going on here? So we put a collar on her and we let her go. And I'm going to show you some segments of her movement over the course of about 8 or 9 months. And this is an essential pattern of what we would call a transient animal. She was running around looking for territory to call her own. And so just check this out. We released her and this is her movements. Each segment is about a month. of movement. You can see her clustering. No doubt she's coming into conflict and contact with these other coyotes in these areas. That's Bernal right there. She caused quite a stir in the Bernal neighborhood when she came into conflict with the beloved Bernal coyote. She ultimately left Bernal as Potrero right there. Land's End, Presidio, and then boom. What happened there? All of a sudden, moving around a lot, kind of messy looking, a little bit of pattern, and then clean cut pattern right in the Presidio. What's going on there? And if it wasn't for our security camera outside of a restaurant, we would have not caught this on film. But I edited down this security camera footage for brevity's sake. But this is what happens with territorial animals when a transient comes through. So it's kind of hard to keep track of who's who here, but I hope you're able to see that. And it's not being blocked by anything. And just note, look at, this is the middle of the day. There's people walking around, there's cars. Nobody knows, nobody sees this. Look at what's happening right here. And people are unaware this is happening right under their noses. And so that's the original alpha female right there. And that's the new pair. So double red came back with a mate. And zooming in there, again, I hope my face isn't blocking this because it is on my screen. There's no sound, so you're not missing anything with the sound. That's the new male, her double red's male. And the two females are just really, I saw the aftermath at the bottom of the stairs, and there was a lot of blood down there. And again, this is an edited version, so it was a lot longer and a lot more drawn out than this. But you can you can see people walking by in the background and cars, and this coup d'etat, this regime change. That's the original alpha female huddled down there in the stairs. And look how victorious double red is right there and her mate. So where's the 01, the original alpha female? Where's her mate? We never captured him. We never collared him. He was too elusive for us. So we don't actually know why wasn't he there. He probably could have helped. We don't know what happened to him. His fate was unknown. But we think he died. Maybe he got hit by a car. Maybe he died of old age. We really don't know. But the original alpha female, was left by herself. And this new pair came in, and at least this one fight, certainly probably more, we don't know. But we caught this on film, and they ran her out. It was a really significant time for the regime change of the Presidio coyotes. And so unfortunately, she was run out. This is a picture of her, 2013. That's the furthest back we have a record of her in the Presidio. She might be 9 months old right there. She could be a year. She looks pretty young to me, but she's got kind of her summer coat there. But she looks, it's 2013, and I could tell it's her because she's got a birthmark under her left eye. Again, this is thanks to IMAT here. Otherwise, this is before I started this program, so I wouldn't have known this. But unfortunately, she got ran out, and her mate again probably died, so she was by herself. She was seen spotted in Golden Gate Park over the months. She looked really sad. Literally, you could see she looked defeated. Her ears were saggy. She just looked depressed. And unfortunately, one day I got a phone call from Caltrans, or actually the Peninsula Humane Society, and they found her dead, unfortunately, down in Pacifica. She got hit by a car, which was really sad. She was a great dog. But life goes on, and that's what coyotes do. This is the new Presidio regime established 2019. And I just want to remind people, because I know coyotes and emotions are like this. Some people might think, oh, double red, you're mean. Why would you do that? That's mean. We need to step back, and we need to take ourselves out of our human emotions and remember, these are animals. These are territorial animals. This is what coyotes are. This is coyotes being coyotes. This is how this is what happens. This is not coyotes being mean or being jerks. This is coyotes being coyotes. They're territorial animals. So now we have a new alpha pair in the Presidio, a new regime, and we're continuing to monitor this pair. Last year was double red's first litter in the Presidio, and I showed a clip of that earlier, and that was her. I didn't acknowledge it, but that was her. And so that's it, really. And then I just want to kind of tighten this up and wrap it up. with thinking of a bigger picture here. So we're doing this work in the Presidio. We work regularly with San Francisco Rec and Park Animal Care and Control. We've been doing that for a long time now because, of course, these animals do not abide by political boundaries. They cross boundaries, of course, and we want to maintain consistency with our messaging and with our management and approaches across these boundaries and borders. We want to keep our language and our strategies the same, on the same page, so that we can work together and share data and minimize conflict to the extent possible. So we've been working with that group, the city, for a while now. And from that, we've started to branch out, and we've been working with the National Park Service, helping them develop their monitoring program in the Marin Headlands that just started getting off the ground last year. They're starting to really get some really good data. And most exciting is tapping into the academic resources in the greater Bay Area, specifically UC Berkeley and UC Davis. So right now we have a graduate student, a PhD student over at UC Davis, who is taking the just tremendous amounts of data that we're gathering and collecting through our monitoring and actually putting it to good use. I don't have the time to go through the tens of thousands of data points and all the tissue samples. I don't have the resources. I don't have the expertise to go through all the fur samples for stable isotope dietary analysis and DNA extraction from scat to understand what are they eating on the DNA level. Are they eating human food? Are they eating natural food or mix thereof? So this is where these resources are really huge. We provide just a tremendous amount of data. They have the expertise and resources to analyze that. They advance the science of understanding these animals in the urban ecosystem. That information comes back to us. That information plugs into our management plan. We can better manage these animals. And again, when I say that, what I mean is reduce conflict between people and coyotes to the extent possible. We have a professor coming in, Chris Schell from University of Washington, coming in from UC Berkeley as a new professor over there. And what I hope to in the long term, my vision is basically what's happening is more and more municipalities around the greater Bay Area, as far out as Sacramento, and even beyond. I talked to a guy in Texas who had questions, people in New York, but generally in the greater Bay Area, people are starting to really reach out and say, hey, more and more coyotes are popping up in our neighborhoods. We have no experience. We don't know what to do. We found your name on the internet. What do we do? And really the long-term vision is what I hope to happen is to start a network with all these different municipalities and to basically expand what we've been doing with Rec and Park and Animal Care and Control on a bigger level. Consistency of the coexistence approach and a 21st century approach to managing coyotes and humans in our urban environments, because they're not going away. They're here to stay. So we need to find out best practices and maintain consistency through science. And that's where this new professor at Berkeley is coming in. And what I'm hoping is Berkeley is going to be the hub of this Bay Area network and feeding in data and information. And they're going to generate the science that's going to help better manage and create a positive feedback loop of information across the greater Bay Area. That's a long-term vision of mine and our group in the city. And it's starting to pick up some traction through these two universities. So really cool, exciting things coming down as this grad student at Davis starts to analyze and dig really deep into this tremendous amount of data that we've been collecting. And while they do that, we continue to do what we do here in the Presidio in San Francisco. And just to end this on a recap, so we can all remember, a lot of information was dropped here. Coyotes are important. Again, this is preaching to the choir here with CMPS, but predators like coyotes are important to a healthy, balanced ecosystem. Their presence promotes greater biodiversity through their adding of their checks and balances of their predation of small animals like gophers. Ecosystem services benefits us humans because we don't really like gophers and rats in our urban environments. Our behaviors as humans really drive a lot of conflict. Feeding animals is number one. Of course, again, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience already know that. A fed coyote is a dead coyote. Fed bear is a dead bear. We've all heard these in the national parks like Yosemite. It applies everywhere. Hazing is a tool, can be used. It's usually not necessary, it can be used, but when you use it, you want to really understand where you're at. You don't want to run them into traffic. If it's pupping season and you have a dog, hazing is not going to work. Get the dog out of the area. There's probably pups nearby. Pupping season, number one most important time for dog owners. most important, the busiest time of year for me here in the Presidio, keeping that buffer between the active den and the dogs is huge to reducing that conflict. And reporting, I didn't really talk about that. I did mention iNaturalist. Keep it coming, you iNatters. I know you use it, and that's huge. It's great. It's awesome. It helps. But if you ever see something, people feeding, a coyote that's acting weird, you don't even know, is it weird? Is it not weird? Don't hesitate, report. If you're in the Presidio, you want to report to me, Coyote at presidiotrust.gov. There's signs everywhere. My information is all over those signs. So if you forget it, you'll see the sign. If you're in the city, just call Animal Care and Control. Don't call San Francisco Police Department. Call Animal Care and Control. Easiest thing to remember. If you're in San Francisco, call Animal Care. All right, and I'm going to end it there. I know I dropped a lot of information. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So thank you. I don't know even if I went over time. I hope I didn't, but thank you. And I'll open it up.
Jonathan, that was incredible. Thank you so much. This was so useful. Incredible pictures. Thank you. And the iNaturalist users. It's incredible. So we've got a bunch of questions. How do coyotes and foxes interact?
Yeah, good question. Generally, they are competitors, and coyotes will kill them. We used to have more gray foxes in the Presidio and in San Francisco. Not only coyotes, but it's also cars. Every now and then, gray foxes will pop up in the Presidio and San Francisco. Gray foxes have an advantage to coyotes because they can climb trees, so that's good for them. But most of when they pop up, they get hit by cars, unfortunately. But they are competitors. Red fox used to be more common throughout San Francisco, but when the coyotes came back and became more established, you saw a decline in red foxes as well. So.
And how do you catch coyotes to tag them?
Yeah, so a lot of people want to know about that. We don't use box traps because coyotes are way too smart for box traps. Leg hold traps are illegal in California, and even though you can do humane leg hold traps, it still hurts the animal, so we don't use those. We use loops, neck loops, rubberized neck loops, and we have ankle loops as well. But when we catch them, it's basically like putting a metal collar on them that they can't get out of. We monitor each trap with a wireless camera, so when it gets activated, we know we can respond immediately. And when we catch the animal, fun fact, we do not anesthetize these animals. A lot of people are like, "What? You don't drug these animals and knock them out? They don't rip your face off?" No, they don't. Coyotes, unlike raccoons, you cannot do this with a raccoon. You need drugs with a raccoon. Coyotes, when you put your hands on them, and I'm not condoning this, I'm not saying do this, but when we as trained professionals put our hands on them, their strategy is to play dead. So they play dead. They are the best patients you could ask for. So we catch them, we pull them out, we put our hands on them, we muzzle them and blindfold them, and we process them like that. We have one person firmly hands on hips and hands on shoulders and neck, while the other person puts the collar on, tags them, draws blood, takes the samples, and then we let them go. And the beauty with not anesthetizing them is when you let them go, they're not inebriated, they're not going to run into traffic, they're fully conscious, they're awake, and they're going to run and hide. You don't have to babysit them. So again, you cannot do that with most other animals, but coyote's strategy is to play dead.
And if you could repeat, what's the name of the UC Berkeley professor who
his name is Chris Schell. He hasn't started yet. He starts, I think, this fall. He's done some really cool research out of University of Washington with urban wildlife and specifically urban coyotes. So he's got a lot of presence in the wildlife community because of the work that he's done. So it's really cool that he's coming down, and I've talked to him. I've told him everything. I've caught him up to speed, and he's like gung-ho, ready to go, get knee deep in the world of urban coyotes in the Bay Area. So I'm very excited for him to come down.
That sounds amazing. We've got a question about what can we do as a resident to support coyotes in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is not feeding them. And if you're a dog owner or any pet owner, being a responsible pet owner, because coyotes, other than the car issue, which is a really complicated issue that I don't know a solution to, other than people being better drivers, they really don't need our help. as we've seen in this presentation and a lot of us have been hearing, they've done well in spite of over a century of government persecution. These animals are thriving. They don't really need our help, but what they need is indirect help through public education. That's really what is the most important thing, is understanding our role, how we, human behaviors as a community, can drive conflict, real or perceived, and what can we do to reduce that, directly or indirectly. That's really number one, because we don't want these animals to turn into, food conditioned animal that's going to bite somebody, and then all coyotes are to blame. We don't want that. We want good urban coyotes, and good urban coyotes come through our behaviors, and not always, but generally. So that's really key, is educate your neighbors with the facts. And if you see something, people feeding them, because this happens in the city, not so much in the Presidio, but you see people feeding them, you need to alert animal care and control so they can address the problem.
Good plan. I've got a question. Double Red, was she dethroning her mother?
We have the genetics for both of them. So once the graduate student starts to dig into the genetics and really start to build that family tree, we could answer that question. I don't know. My sense is no. I'm sure most coyotes in San Francisco are somewhat related, but I don't know. I don't know her origin story. I don't know either of their origin story, but that's where genetics comes in the bigger picture. And so they're going to be building a bigger genetic tree through all of their scat samples they're taking and all these other samples that we're getting from roadkill across the state, that we can then really put genetic context around San Francisco coyotes. So a lot of cool things to come to answer questions like that.
Wow. May we have the name of that graduate student?
Her name is Tali Caspi, Caspi. If Tali, if you're watching, I'm sorry I gave your name out. I don't know why she would care about that, but I think she's been featured in a lot of articles, so her name's already out there if you Google it.
They're asking if you know anything about the coyotes living near the Randall Museum.
The Corona Heights pair, I don't know too much. I know that they're also the Buena Vista, and I think they were also the same group potentially that were at USF. There's that kind of triangle. And Carl, the famous Carl, who used to be the Buena Vista Corona Heights coyote, he got driven out or left. I'm not sure. I believe he got driven out. I'm not 100% sure on that, because I don't spend as much time outside of the Presidio studying the coyotes. So I can't answer these as thoroughly as I could Presidio coyotes, but Carl's got a big old scar on his right snout. You can see his little canine sticking out. He got attacked by a dog a couple years ago. And he popped up. He was bouncing around the city. He popped up in Golden Gate Park. But the who's who of Corona coyotes now, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Got a question. How did coyotes come back to San Francisco? How did they get reestablished?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of urban legends around that. But there was a graduate student at the UC Davis Ben Sachs lab. Ben Sachs is another great canid biologist who does a lot of really cool stuff, and he's been helping intellectually with this project over the years. He had a PhD student about 10 years ago do some genetic sampling of scat in coyote scat in San Francisco, and to no surprise, some of that genetic material linked up to coyotes in the South Bay. And right, if you go back and you think about the image that I showed of the long distance dispersal of O2M all the way down past San Jose and back, they navigate these urban areas like no problem. So to think of an urban area as a barrier to a coyote is not realistic. So the peninsula is like a funnel, and there's endless coyotes. They're going to be coming up from the south. There is some genetic evidence to suggest that some coyotes, or at least one coyote, the one coyote that had a link to the north of San Francisco, that at least one coyote came south across the Golden Gate Bridge. We only have literally one individual genetics from one individual to suggest that has happened. Of course, everybody knows the Golden Gate Bridge has cameras all over it. We've actually talked to the guys who sit there and monitor those cameras 24/7, and they see raccoons mostly. They've never seen a coyote. Of course, we know deer occasionally come across, but I wouldn't be surprised if a coyote wanders across the Golden Gate Bridge. Would not be surprised at all, but all evidence now suggests most majority have and are coming up from the south. And again, San Francisco coyotes are going south as well. We have not tracked a coyote that went north across the bridge, nor have we heard or seen a coyote go east across the Bay Bridge yet.
Interesting. If the California quail is reintroduced into the Presidio, would that end up feeding coyotes? And
well, I'm glad somebody brought that up because I forgot to mention that little thing. That's another reason why coyotes are a good thing when we talk about bigger ecosystem restoration. Again, I was talking about the bottom up conservation management, like plants management, and then the top down, thinking of predatory top down ecosystem dynamics. Quail, as a lot of us know, went locally extinct in San Francisco pretty recently, but functionally, we'll say quail functionally went extinct in the early 2000s, somewhere around there. For a lot of reasons, habitat degradation, etc. But a lot of reasons also, ground nesting birds don't fare very well when places are infested with rats and feral cats. So that was during the time when coyotes were not present, right? So the dynamics of the ecosystem has shifted now that these predators have come in. And well, just for example, feral cats in the Presidio used to be a thing. Big colonies. There's no colonies. There's not even, I can think of occasionally seeing one feral cat in the Presidio. Very rare, very rare. So the dynamics have changed for a lot of reasons relative to quail restoration. Coyotes probably would eat quail, I'm sure. But again, that's why we want to manage the habitat to provide escape for quail from things like coyotes and other predators like raptors. And there's things that you can do, structure higher shrubs, denser vegetation in open areas, so that these little birds can run and hide or get up into a tree away from predators like coyotes.
Interesting. Is there any estimated number of coyotes in San Francisco?
Oh, that's another great question. And it bothers me to no end when I see people in the newspaper, the writers just quote numbers with no source at all. We don't have a hard number. That's very difficult to get because, as I said, I showed that graph, it's constantly in flux. Pups are born, pups die, pups disperse, transients come in, they overthrow residents, blah, blah, blah. It's constantly in flux. But you can kind of take the Presidio as a 1,500 acre patch. That's one pair of coyotes. And we'll say on average, there's 6 coyotes in the Presidio on average in a 1,500 acre park. So you can kind of start to apply that to other areas in San Francisco where you know coyotes are living. And again, some of these patches like Corona and Buena Vista are 2 patches, but it's the same pair of coyotes. So the safest, easiest answer that most people are not satisfied with, but it's the easiest answer, is there are dozens of coyotes in San Francisco. It's constantly in flux. We know that there's pretty regularly 2 breeding pairs in Golden Gate Park, 1 breeding pair in Glen Canyon, you know, so you can kind of start to do the math, but dozens is the safest number, or range, I should say. Not a very satisfactory answer.
What resources, such as books or podcasts, would you recommend to learn more about coyotes?
There's a few books that are pretty interesting. There's some really dry scientific ones. Like I think it's just Coyote Biology and Ecology by Mark. I always forget his last name. I wish I had the books here, but if you can Amazon book search Coyote Mark. It sounds like Mark Benioff, but it's not Mark Benioff. That's a good one. It's pretty dry, and it tries to update it, but it's from the 70s, and it's not as urban. It's the more rural, older science. There's another science book called Urban Carnivores. That's again more of a compilation of the hard sciences. A little dry if you're not scientifically minded, but one of the really interesting ones that has a lot of pop culture references, and I actually learned a lot from it, is Coyote America by Dan Flores. There's actually a lot of interesting history about coyotes in the indigenous cultures and in pop culture. It's a pretty interesting read. The other one that's interesting is I can't remember now. It's Stop the War on Carnivores, or It's something more on carnivores, and it's like, what's the cutting edge science right now of using humane management strategies? It's mainly focused on livestock and predator management instead of the traditional just go shoot them. It's like, what kind of sciences are best for reducing livestock, which livestock and predators are really what give the reputation for all predators because of the money around that, and it just kind of seeps into popular culture. But I wish I remember that name. But I would recommend Coyote America because it gives you, it's not a hard science book, and it gives you an interesting kind of pop culture perspective to it.
And has there been a breeding pair in the eastern part of San Francisco, like Telegraph Hill?
So there is one in Potrero. I think it's pretty consistent, a pair there. And then, as I showed in this little presentation, 10F, the Presidio double yellow. As far as I know, I think we did get, I have to review through the INAT, but I think she does have she found a mate down in Candlestick Park. And of course, San Bruno Mountains right there, so there's certainly some crossover. And McLaren Park, there's definitely coyotes in McLaren Park, so I'm assuming that there is a breeding pair there.
Nice. Are there tracking projects similar to yours elsewhere in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so the Park Service and the Marin Headlands started, they in fall 2020, they basically implemented the same general concept in the headlands. So they've been, of course, it's really interesting to compare because obviously the headlands are much different, and they have different drivers of conflict in the headlands than we do here. Dogs and dens is not really much of a thing over there because there's so much open space. Coyotes can get really far away from all the activity, as opposed to the Presidio, where there's just dogs and people everywhere. Their biggest thing over there is tourists feeding the coyotes to get that perfect shot of the coyote and the bridge in the background. There was one coyote, they nicknamed him Hollywood, because the last several years, there's just all over the internet, all the time, is him and the bridge. Just picture perfect, and the city in the background. And how were they getting those shots? They were feeding him. And he was becoming an issue because he was just constantly going up to people like, where's my food? Hey, where's my food? And it's like, Big Mac, here it is, in and out, there you go. So they have different problems there, but their tracking and management is starting to pick up, and it's starting to really uncover a lot of these patterns.
Are they seeing coyotes in Berkeley or the East Bay?
That's the interesting thing, that I'm very surprised that, of course, the Berkeley Hills, yes, but in the like Oakland, you don't, if you search INAT, not really. And I talked to some folks that I know in the kind of animal care control over there. No, not really, not a thing yet, at least. And that's where, again, the greater Bay Area, as I said, I'm getting more calls over the recently from these municipalities that just it's going to happen. It's starting to happen, and they're starting to get it on their radar. Their constituents, their residents are starting to notice it. They're starting to call, starting to say things, starting to voice their concerns, and that's where these managers in municipalities are starting to be like, oh, okay, well, it's coming, it's here. What do we do? So I think it's a matter of time. And I think one thing to think about too is the dynamics between encampments and coyotes. And where you have more encampments, basically just more human activity in these patches where coyotes otherwise would be occupying, the coyotes aren't going to be there. And again, if somebody's feeding them, they're going to be there, but they're not going to really use it as their shelter. They're just going to go as a food source. So when you start to see that dynamic, and that's one thing. So I think that's happening a lot in the East Bay. It happens here in the Presidio. They'll set up a den, an encampment will pop up right next to it, and then they'll move the den, and they won't go into that area. So when you see influxes of encampments, you see coyotes don't really go into that area so much. So no, in short, you don't see that so much in Oakland and in the core areas of Berkeley, but I wouldn't be surprised at some point that it's going to happen.
And someone, Rebecca, says that the book is Coyotes, Biology, Behavior, and Management by Mark Bekoff.
Bekoff, not Benioff.
And Lipa says that they're getting coyotes this year at the King Estate Open Space Park in East Oakland.
And so it's just a matter of time before, again, the authorities, there's like a animal care and control of Oakland. They of course they haven't had to deal with it, so they don't have like a coyote plan or experience. So again, that's where this larger Bay Area network, it's inevitable. I mean, I hope it is, because so we could at least share data and maintain consistency across all of these arbitrary boundaries and borders. Because if somebody says one thing and does one thing, and then another city does one thing and does another thing, it needs to mesh. We need to mesh. So, and that's where I see really UC Berkeley is the hub of that, from the kind of authoritative scientific hub that feeds the science and management, and we share how the things work, lessons learned. I know I was in a group with the East Bay Regional Parks recently, and they have a different situation because they have big open spaces with like issues with people and horses and cattle and coyotes, and so I don't have experience with that, but some of it's relevant, some of it's not. But you can see how these things are really all relevant to each other.
There are questions about interactions between coyotes and mountain lions. What are those like?
Well, I don't really know, because, well, depends on how you say it. But and from my perspective, I don't get to work with mountain lions. I would imagine that if there was a situation where they came into contact with each other, a mountain lion potentially would harm a coyote, and that's the understanding of when I said when we catch these coyotes, their strategy is to play dead. The idea is, at least the theory is, hypothesis, at least that we've talked about, is the predators, natural predators of coyotes wouldn't necessarily be endurance animals, like a big grizzly bear or something. They're not endurance animals, or they're kind of like that type of animals that would, if they killed their prey and the prey was dead, they'd just sit there and go, okay, catch my breath, let's just wait. And so that the idea is, well, coyotes, that's their strategy, is when they come into contact with a bigger predator, they'll play dead, and the other animal, the predator might look away or just be distracted, take its breath for a second. And I'm telling you, when you're on the field and you take your hand off a coyote, most of the times they are gone. They won't look at you, they're just gone. Get as fast and far away as possible. So kind of went off topic there, but I think mountain lion could kill a coyote if they got into that kind of situation where the coyote wouldn't just run. But I don't know, because I unfortunately don't get to work with mountain lions. At least not as often as I would like. But as we all know, who live in San Francisco, it seems about every year now we get at least one mountain lion. There was a mountain lion confirmed in Land's End January of this year, and there was one the year before that confirmed. So they're seemingly every year mountain lions come in. They don't live here; they just pass through.
And Sylvia says that there's a pair of coyotes at the Sunset Reservoir, 24th and 28th, south of Ortega.
The media nicknamed them reservoir dogs. That's a great example of a buffered area. It's a I think privately owned business reservoir, solar panel, gated off area. People aren't allowed to go in there, and so those coyotes might have a den in there. We're not sure, but if they did have a den in there, there's a big old fence buffer around it. So it's like, that's a good spot, because there's no dogs going to run in there and cause, pups and dogs and parents getting angry at each other.
How do coyotes deal with ear ticks or fleas?
That's something that we assess when we have an animal and we're processing it. We do a general comb over of ectoparasites, fleas and ticks, and just assessment generally of their body condition and scars and things like that. Most of the coyotes in the Presidio are fairly low in terms of tick and flea load. They definitely have them. Some of them have them more than others. But depending on their immune system, I know that there was a sick pup that was found in a car garage by Animal Care and Control over in kind of the Cow Hollow area a couple of years ago. And it was so emaciated and sick. It was crawling with fleas, like where the fleas are like the black is just like moving with fleas. And was it sick because it got infested with fleas, or did it get its immune system allowed it to become so infested? We're not sure. I think that one actually did test positive for parvo, but there is that balance of a healthier animal If they're immune deficient for whatever reason, they're going to be more vulnerable to things like parasitism and other issues. And fortunately, we don't have mange in San Francisco. Mange is a mite. I'm sure a lot of you know or have heard mange or seen a mangy coyote. It's a skin mite, and it is just, their hair falls out and they just look so sad and it looks so painful. We don't have that yet in San Francisco. There is a seemingly, I don't want to say an outbreak in Marin, but I've seen a number of pictures on iNaturalist of just some really sad mangy coyotes in Marin, and I hope it does not get to San Francisco. But in terms of ticks, yeah, they get them, but the ones I've seen, they don't seem to be too bad.
And do you have a favorite coyote? And
that's something we try to keep a distance, because as I said, a lot of them get hit by cars. So we don't name them, because again, we don't want to be attached to these animals, because these animals are wild animals. They live in the real world. Even though it's an urban world, there's still a lot of harsh realities, traffic. So I've, seeing those dispersing animals, cheering them on, keep going, this is so cool. And then getting the phone call from Caltrans. After the first couple, it was like, okay, if a dispersing animal doesn't make it, that's what I expect. When I get emails from people like Maryland down south saying, hey, is this your tagged animal? And he has pup, that's like, oh, wow, that is so cool to see. Again, even an animal like it's one litter in its life is a successful animal. And the former alpha female had, I don't know how many litters, but at least since 2015, a litter, to 2019. She probably had more than that, but so that's where I like to keep it. I would say my favorite coyote is a urban coyote that doesn't get into anything bad, which again, sometimes that could be human driven, but a good shy urban coyote that scoots away when hazed, runs away, doesn't cause problems. That's my favorite coyote right there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for staying with us and in talking to us. This was incredibly informative. And we're looking forward to keeping up with your work. And I follow you on iNaturalist. So thank you so much. Any other questions in the Q&A? A lot of feedback from people thanking you for this and just telling you how wonderful it was.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Coyotes are, as I said, not going away. Love them or hate them. I think slowly we've seen the needle start to shift. Sometimes we monitor social media. I try to avoid it, like next door. I just can't handle it. But we have people that I work with that monitor it. That's their job. And they tell me generally what's happening. It seems like it's shifting to more informed conversations and less just anger. And I think people are, after 20 years now, starting to understand that these animals are here to stay. But you would be surprised how many people still don't even know what a coyote is. Seriously, I'm not exaggerating. People call or email saying, what's this? And it's like, that's a raccoon, or is that a grizzly bear? It's like, not just coyote, but just general wildlife awareness and knowledge for urban people. This community, we got a long way to go for educating and getting that awareness out, because you'd be surprised some of the questions I get.
I'm so sorry. Well, thank you so much.
No, it's good. It's all good.
Thank you for doing this for us, letting us record it. We will have this on the internet so that other people can review it and learn from you. So thank you all for coming. And thank you, Jonathan, for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, everyone.